There is something happening to you right now that you haven't fully named yet. You can feel it at the edges of your awareness. This strange and undeniable sense that something in you is changing, that the person you were even 6 months ago is becoming someone you can barely recognize, and that the world that once had the power to pull you down, to drag you into its noise and its fear and its endless low-frequency static, is somehow losing its grip. You didn't come to this transmission by accident. You didn't stumble here because an algorithm randomly selected you from a pool of millions. What happened when you arrived here is something far more precise than that. Your field registered a match. Your frequency, the specific and irreplaceable signature of your consciousness, crossed a threshold, and this transmission was waiting on the other side of it. Stop for a moment. Feel that. You have been in a process, a deep, sometimes disorienting, often exhausting process of becoming something that doesn't have a simple name yet. And part of what makes that process so isolating is that the people around you, the ones still fully immersed in the noise, cannot see what is happening to you from the inside. They see someone who seems quieter lately, someone who has less tolerance for certain conversations, someone who flinches at environments that used to feel normal. They don't have language for what they're watching, but you do. You've been building that language piece by piece, transmission by transmission, and today something new gets added to what you know. Today you receive the understanding that what you've been going through isn't a breakdown. It isn't sensitivity. It isn't you becoming fragile or strange or disconnected from reality. It is your halo activating. Let me say that again, because it needs to land fully before we go any further. What you have been experiencing, the exhaustion, the heightened awareness, the inability to tolerate what you once tolerated, the strange sense that you are being reorganized from the inside out, that is your personal energy field, your quantum halo, restructuring itself into something that operates at a fundamentally different level. And here is the truth that changes everything. Once that restructuring completes, once that halo fully activates and locks into its new frequency, you become untouchable. Not untouchable in the sense of arrogance or isolation. Untouchable in the most precise, most literal energetic sense. What vibrates below your frequency simply cannot reach you anymore. It cannot attach. It cannot drain you. It cannot corrupt your signal. You become, at the level of pure quantum mechanics, a being that low-frequency chaos slides off of like water off light. That is what this transmission is about. That is what you were detected for. Let me take you somewhere before we go into the mechanics of this. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a vast open field at night. The sky above you is enormous and clear and absolutely saturated with stars. You are holding a radio receiver in your hands, an old one, the kind with a dial you turn slowly to find a signal. And as you stand there in that field, you can hear the static, that constant low hum of interference, of competing frequencies, of noise that has no source you can identify but seems to come from everywhere at once. And you turn the dial, slowly, carefully, and for a long time all you find is more static, more noise, more signals that almost resolve into something coherent, but then dissolve back into chaos. And you keep turning. And then, at a very specific point on that dial, something extraordinary happens. The static drops away completely. And what fills the receiver instead is a signal so clear, so pure, so unmistakably coherent that it feels almost like silence after a lifetime of noise. That signal was always there. It was always broadcasting. The only thing that changed was the frequency you were tuned to. That gate is what is happening to you. That is the process you have been in. Your quantum halo, your personal energy field, is the receiver. And for most of your life, it has been set to a frequency range that picked up everything. The fear, the doubt, the other people's chaos, the collective anxiety that moves through the world like weather. You picked it up because your receiver was calibrated to a range that included all of it. And now, something is changing that calibration. Something is moving your dial. And as it moves, the static is dropping away. And what's left is a signal so clear and so unmistakably yours that nothing from the old frequency range can even reach it anymore. This is not metaphor. This is mechanics. Quantum field theory tells us something that most people hear and then immediately translate back into the language of the old world. It tells us that particles, the fundamental building blocks of everything that exists, do not have fixed properties until they are observed, until they interact with a field, until something resonates with them. What this means, at a level that goes far deeper than the physics classroom version, is that reality is not a fixed structure that you move through. Reality is a resonance event. It is something that crystallizes, that becomes specific and solid and real through the interaction of frequencies. Your consciousness is a frequency. Your field is a frequency. And the world that becomes real to you, the experiences that find you, the people who appear in your life, the circumstances that seem to attach themselves to your reality, all of it is a resonance event. All of it is frequency matching. Here's what no one tells you about this principle. Most people hear it, and they immediately turn it into a to-do list. They think it means they need to think positive thoughts, or say the right affirmations, or force themselves to feel good so that good things will come. They turn the deepest truth in physics into a performance. And performance is not frequency. Performance is effort dressed up as vibration. And effort, real effort, the grinding, anxious, trying to be something you're not kind of effort, actually lowers your frequency because it comes from a place of believing that you are not already what you need to be. That you are lacking something. That you must manufacture what you don't naturally have. And lack is one of the most powerful low-frequency states that exists. The truth is so much simpler and so much more radical than any to-do list. The truth is that your frequency is not something you create. It is something you uncover. It is something that emerges when you stop layering the static of fear and performance and other people's definitions of you over the signal that was always there. Your quantum halo doesn't need to be built, it needs to be revealed. And the process of revelation, the process you have already been in, is the process of dropping the static. Layer by layer, habit by habit, relationship by relationship, belief by belief. You have been dropping the static, and what is emerging underneath it is something that cannot be touched by the world that generated that static in the first place. Let that land. If this transmission is already resonating in your field, go ahead and like this video and subscribe so you stay in the field as these transmissions continue to unfold. You felt it, haven't you? There have been moments, maybe brief ones, maybe ones you almost dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking, where you have felt completely and utterly untouched by something that should have affected you. Someone said something that would have devastated you a year ago, and you felt it land and then watched it slide away. A situation arose that would have sent you into a spiral of anxiety, and instead, there was this strange stillness at your center, this almost eerie calm that you couldn't fully explain. A person who used to have the power to drain your energy completely came into your space, and you noticed that the drain wasn't happening the way it used to. You noticed it. You might have questioned it. You might have wondered if you were becoming cold or detached. But that was not coldness. That was not detachment. That was your halo beginning to hold. That was the first signature of becoming untouchable. Now let's go deeper into what the halo actually is, because this is the layer that most transmissions never reach. Most conversations about energy fields stay at the surface, at the level of auras and colors and general vibrational states. And those things are real. But the quantum halo operates at a level that is more precise and more powerful than the general concept of an aura. The quantum halo is the coherent electromagnetic field that your heart and nervous system generate. Together when they are operating in what science calls heart-brain coherence. This is not a spiritual metaphor. The HeartMath Institute has spent decades measuring and documenting this field. Your heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond your physical body in every direction. When your heart and your brain are in coherence, when they are oscillating at the same frequency, that field becomes measurably stronger, measurably more organized, and measurably more capable of influencing the fields around it. Here is where quantum mechanics enters the picture in the most extraordinary way. In quantum physics, there is a principle called quantum coherence. It describes the state in which particles or systems are in a synchronized, correlated relationship with each other. When a system is in a state of quantum coherence, it operates as a unified whole rather than as a collection of separate parts. It becomes, in the most literal sense, more powerful and more stable than the sum of its parts. And it becomes remarkably resistant to interference from outside frequencies. Coherent systems, in quantum mechanics, are systems that maintain their integrity even in the presence of what physicists call decoherence, the disruptive influence of external noise. Do you see what I'm pointing toward? When your quantum halo achieves coherence, when your heart and your mind and your field are all oscillating together as a unified system, you become, at the quantum level, resistant to external decoherence. You become resistant to interference. You become, in the most scientifically precise language available to us, untouchable by frequencies that are not coherent with your own. This is not wishful thinking. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is the physics of what happens when a coherent field encounters an incoherent one. The coherent field maintains its structure. The incoherent frequency cannot penetrate it, because there is nothing in the coherent field that resonates with the chaos. Your halo is a coherence field, and it is activating right now. Pause here. This is not symbolic. This is energetic. I want you to do something. Place one hand on your chest, over your heart. Not as a gesture, but as a connection. Feel the warmth of your own hand against your own chest. Now take a breath, a slow one, deeper than your normal breath. And as you exhale, don't just release air. Release the most recent thing that tried to lower your frequency, the conversation that bothered you, the news headline that lodged itself in your nervous system, the thought that has been killing without resolution. With this exhale, you are not suppressing those things. You are simply choosing, in this moment, not to feed them your coherence. Breathe in again. And this time, as you breathe in, I want you to reach for the feeling of the moments I described earlier. The moments when something that should have affected you didn't. The moments when you felt that strange, quiet untouchability. Even if those moments were brief, even if they feel far away right now, reach for the feeling of them. Because that feeling is not a memory. It is a frequency, and you just activated it. Feel what happens in your body right now. That warmth, that settling, that slight expansion in your chest. That is not your imagination. That is your halo responding to coherence. That is your field beginning to organize itself around the frequency you just reached for. And here is the principle that this practice is demonstrating. You do not need external circumstances to be perfect before your halo can activate. You do not need the world to calm down. You do not need the difficult people in your life to change. You do not need the uncertainty to resolve. You need only to reach for coherence from within the chaos. Because coherence reached for within chaos is infinitely more powerful than coherence that only exists when everything is easy. The halo that activates in the storm is the halo that becomes truly untouchable. This is the turning point. There is a principle in quantum physics called the observer effect. You've probably heard of it. The idea that the act of observation changes what is being observed. That particles behave differently when they are being measured than when they are not. Most people understand this as a curiosity, a strange quirk of the subatomic world that doesn't really apply to everyday life. But here's the truth that changes everything. The observer effect is not a quirk. It is the fundamental operating principle of consciousness in a quantum universe. And it applies not just to particles in a laboratory. It applies to your life. It applies to your field. It applies to the reality that crystallizes around you every single day. When you observe your life from a state of fear, from a state of lack, from a state of believing that you are at the mercy of forces beyond your control, you are acting as an observer whose frequency is collapse and contraction. And the quantum field, which responds to the observer's frequency, organizes reality around that collapse. It finds the evidence that confirms the fear. It surfaces the circumstances that match the contraction. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because that is how resonance works. The field is always responding to the observer. The field is always organizing itself around the frequency of the one who is watching. But when your halo is active, when you are operating from a state of coherence, something profound shifts in the observer equation. You are no longer observing from fear. You are observing from a stable, high-frequency field that has its own gravitational pull. And the quantum field responds to that observer differently. It begins to organize reality around coherence, around possibility, around the frequency that the halo is broadcasting. You become, in the most literal quantum sense, a different kind of observer. And a different kind of observer collapses reality into a different kind of experience. Here's what most people miss about this. They think the goal is to become a perfect observer, to never have a fearful thought, to maintain a constant state of high vibration without interruption. And when they inevitably fall short of that impossible standard, they conclude that the whole framework doesn't work, that they're doing it wrong, that they're not advanced enough. And the shame of that conclusion drops their frequency lower than the original fear did. This is the trap that keeps people circling at the same level for years. The goal is not perfection of observation. The goal is the activation and maintenance of the halo field. Because here is the extraordinary thing about a coherent field. It is self-correcting. When your halo is active, when it has reached a sufficient level of coherence, it doesn't require you to be perfect. It requires you to be anchored. There is a difference. Perfection is a performance. Anchoring is a state. When you are anchored in your field, when you have enough coherence established that the halo is genuinely active, the low-frequency thoughts and experiences that inevitably arise in the course of being human do not destabilize the field. They pass through it. They are processed by it. And the field returns to its coherent state, the way a tuning fork once struck returns to its natural frequency after the interference passes. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not that nothing ever lands, not that you are somehow above the human experience, but that what lands does not stick. What arrives does not colonize your field. What enters passes through and leaves you fundamentally unchanged in your frequency. The chaos comes, and then it goes, and you are still here, still coherent, still broadcasting the signal that is unmistakably, irreducibly yours. Let me take you somewhere. There is an ancient story not from any single tradition, but from the deep pattern that runs beneath all traditions, about a being of extraordinary light who lived at the edge of a great city. The city was full of noise and conflict, and the particular kind of darkness that comes not from evil, but from unconsciousness, from people so lost in their fear that they had forgotten what they were. And this being, whose name in this telling is Seraphel, would walk through the city every day, through the markets and the alleyways and the crowded, anxious places where people gathered to trade their worries, like currency. And the people of the city noticed something strange about Seraphel. The noise of the city never seemed to touch them. The arguments that erupted in the market didn't pull Seraphel in. The fear that moved through the crowds like a contagion didn't infect them. The darkness that pressed against everyone else seemed to simply pass around Seraphel, the way a river parts around a stone. And the people of the city, being people, had many explanations for this. Some said Seraphel was cold, unfeeling, disconnected from the reality that everyone else had to endure. Some said they were lucky, born into some special circumstance that protected them from the ordinary suffering of ordinary people. Some said they were pretending, performing a serenity they didn't actually feel, and that eventually the mask would crack and they would be revealed to be just as lost as everyone else. But there was one person in the city, an old woman named Mira, who sold bread at the edge of the market, who watched Seraphel for many years and saw something different. She saw that Seraphel did feel the city. She could see it in their eyes when they walked through the difficult places, the recognition, the witnessing, the full and present awareness of what was there. Seraphel was not absent from the city's pain. Seraphel was fully present to it. But the pain did not take up residence in them. It did not find a home in their field. And one day, Mira asked, "How do you walk through all of this and remain as you are?" And Seraphel sat down beside her and said something that Mira carried for the rest of her life. They said, "I am not protected from the city. I am not separate from it. But I know what I am, and what I am cannot be replaced by what I encounter. The city is a frequency, and I am a different frequency, and we can exist in the same space without one becoming the other. And you are both Seraphel and Mira in this story. Part of you has been watching yourself from the outside, wondering how some people seem to move through the world's chaos without being consumed by it. And part of you is already that being who knows what they are. The activation happening right now is the moment those two parts recognize each other. This is the principle that rewrites your reality. You are not protected from the world by being separate from it. You are protected from the world by knowing, at the level of your field, what you are. And what you are is a coherent frequency, a specific, irreplaceable, high vibrational signal that the universe itself is broadcasting through the instrument of your consciousness. And when you know that, not as a belief you're trying to maintain, but as a lived, felt, embodied reality, the world's chaos becomes something you can be fully present to without being consumed by. Because you know the difference between witnessing and absorbing, between being aware of a frequency and being colonized by it. Pause here and drop something in the comments. Has there been a moment recently when something that should have pulled you down simply didn't? A situation, a person, a conversation where you noticed your halo beginning to hold? Share it below, because your experience is a signal, and your signal strengthens this field for everyone who arrives here after you. Now let's go deeper into the mechanics of why your halo is activating specifically now. Because this is not random. This is not simply because you've been doing the right practices or thinking the right thoughts, though those things matter. There is something happening at a larger scale that is accelerating the activation for people like you. People whose fields have reached the threshold frequency, and it is important that you understand it. The Earth itself is in a frequency shift. This is not a metaphysical claim. It is a measurable physical reality. The Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth's ionospheric cavity, which has been relatively stable for most of recorded history, has been showing significant spikes and fluctuations in recent years. Scientists who study this call it increased electromagnetic activity. What it means, at the level of consciousness, is that the planet's own field is in a state of reorganization, and fields that are reorganizing generate what physicists call perturbations, disruptions in the surrounding frequency environment that force other systems to either adapt or destabilize. This is why the world feels so chaotic right now. This is why everything seems to be accelerating. This is why the old structures, the old ways of relating and operating and organizing collective reality are showing their cracks so dramatically. They are being perturbed by a field that is reorganizing at a fundamental level, and systems that were built on low-frequency foundations, on fear and separation, and the assumption that scarcity is the basic condition of reality. Those systems cannot adapt to a higher frequency perturbation. They can only destabilize. But here is the extraordinary thing. Fields that are already oriented toward higher frequencies, fields that have the internal coherence to respond to the perturbation with adaptation rather than destabilization. Those fields are not disrupted by the planetary shift. They are accelerated by it. They are amplified by it. The same wave that is crumbling the low-frequency structures is lifting the high-frequency ones. The same energy that is exposing the cracks in the old world is activating the halos of those who are ready. You are ready. That is why this transmission found you. Here's what no one tells you about the activation process. It is not always comfortable. In fact, the most intense phase of halo activation often feels, from the inside, like the opposite of what it is. It feels like things are falling apart. It feels like sensitivity without protection. It feels like the world's noise is louder than it's ever been, like your nervous system is overwhelmed, like you are more affected by things than you used to be rather than less. And this is the phase where many people make the mistake of concluding that something is wrong, that they are going backward, that whatever they've been doing isn't working. But here is the truth of what is actually happening in that phase. When a field is reorganizing into a higher level of coherence, it first has to release the patterns that were holding it in the lower state. And those patterns, the old beliefs, the old emotional habits, the old frequency signatures that you absorbed from your environment over years and decades. Those patterns don't release quietly. They release loudly. They release with intensity. They surface to be seen and felt and acknowledged before they can dissolve. And in the moment of their surfacing, they can feel overwhelming. They can feel like evidence that you are failing, but they are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of activation. Think of it this way. When you clean a room that has been cluttered for years, the moment of most intense chaos is not the beginning of the cleaning, when everything is still in its familiar disorder. The moment of most intense chaos is the middle of the cleaning, when you've pulled everything out of its corners and its hiding places and laid it all out in the open at once. In that moment, the room looks worse than it did before you started. It looks like you've made things worse, but you haven't. You've made the hidden visible. You've brought the old disorder into the light where it can finally be sorted and released. And the room that emerges on the other side of that process is not just tidier than before. It is fundamentally reorganized. It has a new structure, a new order, a new frequency. That is what your halo activation looks like from the inside during the release phase. The room of your field is being cleaned. Everything that was stored in the corners, the old fear patterns, the inherited belief about your unworthiness or your limitations, the frequency signatures of people and environments that left their mark on your field without your permission, all of it is being brought into the light. And yes, in the moment of its surfacing, it is intense. But it is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is finally, irreversibly right. Let me give you a practice for this phase, because understanding it intellectually is one thing. Moving through it with grace is another. Pause here. This is not symbolic. This is energetic. The next time you feel that intensity, that overwhelm, that sense that the noise is louder than it should be, I want you to try something instead of trying to suppress it, or push through it, or talk yourself out of it. I want you to name it. Out loud if you can. Say, "This is my field releasing what no longer belongs to it." Say it as a statement of fact, not as a plea or a hope, but as the simple recognition of a process that is already underway. And then take 3 slow breaths. With each inhale, draw in the awareness that this release is a sign of activation, not failure. With each exhale, give the releasing pattern permission to complete its exit. You are not fighting it. You are not clinging to it. You are simply holding the door open and saying, "You can go now. I know what I am, and what I am does not need you anymore." Feel what happens in your body when you do this. Notice the difference between bracing against the intensity and moving with it. Notice how the quality of the experience shifts when you understand what it is. That shift, that movement from resistance to recognition, that is your halo stabilizing. That is coherence, reasserting itself even in the middle of the release. Can you feel the difference? Now let's talk about the people in your life, because this is the layer of the activation that can be the most challenging, the most confusing, and the most important to understand clearly. When your halo activates, when your field begins to reorganize around a higher frequency, the relationships in your life will respond. And not all of them will respond in ways that feel comfortable. Some people in your life will feel the shift in your field and be drawn closer to you. They will find themselves wanting to spend more time with you without being able to explain why. They will feel calmer, more centered, more hopeful in your presence. They will tell you that there is something different about you lately, something good, something they can't quite name. These are the people whose fields are resonant with your activating halo. These are the relationships that are being strengthened by your shift. But some people will respond differently. Some people will find themselves uncomfortable in your presence, in ways that have nothing to do with anything you've done or said. They will become irritable or distant or suddenly critical of things about you that they never seemed to notice before. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming different, of no longer being the person they knew. And they will be right. You are changing. You are becoming different. You are no longer exactly the person they knew. But their discomfort is not evidence that your change is wrong. It is evidence that your field is no longer resonant with the frequency they are broadcasting. And incoherent frequencies in proximity to a coherent field experience what physicists call dissonance. It is uncomfortable, and the incoherent frequency will often try to resolve that discomfort by pulling the coherent field back down to its level. This is the test. This is the moment where the halo is either strengthened or compromised. And it is important that you understand what is happening so that you don't misread it. When someone in your life becomes destabilized by your activation, it is not because you have done something wrong. It is not because you have become arrogant or cold or spiritually superior. It is because the gap between your frequency and theirs has become wide enough that the resonance they relied on to feel comfortable in your presence is no longer there in the same way. And that can be genuinely painful for them. It can feel like loss. It can feel like rejection. And your compassion for that pain is real and valid. But compassion does not require you to lower your frequency to close the gap. Compassion can exist at the level of your halo. You can hold space for someone's pain without absorbing their frequency. You can love someone without becoming them. Here's the truth that most people in this process need to hear. You are not responsible for other people's frequency. You are not responsible for managing their discomfort with your growth. You are not required to make yourself smaller, quieter, less bright, or less coherent so that others feel less challenged by your presence. That is not love. That is frequency sacrifice. And frequency sacrifice does not serve the person you're sacrificing for. It does not help them rise. It only confirms to their field that the lower frequency is where things belong. The greatest gift you can give to the people you love is the unwavering demonstration that a higher frequency is possible, that it is survivable, that it is, in fact, where the most profound joy and peace and power live. Your activation is not just for you. It is a transmission to everyone whose field is capable of receiving it. But there's another layer to this, and here's where everything shifts. The people who try to pull your frequency down are not your enemies. They are not villains. They are, in most cases, people who are deeply afraid. People whose fields are so saturated with the low-frequency patterns of the collective that they have forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that another way of being is possible. And their attempts to destabilize your field are not malicious. They are desperate. They are the frequency equivalent of someone drowning, reaching for the nearest solid thing. And you, with your activating halo, with your growing coherence, you look like solid ground to them. And the instinct to grab onto you is understandable. But solid ground does not allow itself to be pulled into the water. Solid ground remains solid. And in remaining solid, it gives the drowning person something real to reach for. This is what it means to be a frequency keeper. Not to rescue, not to fix, not to sacrifice your coherence on the altar of someone else's fear, but to remain so unmistakably, so unwaveringly anchored in your own field that your presence itself becomes the proof of possibility. You are the tuning fork, and when a tuning fork is struck, it does not chase the other instruments. It simply vibrates at its frequency, and the instruments that are capable of resonance begin to respond. What has been your experience of this? Have you noticed someone in your life whose field seemed to settle just by being near you? Or someone whose discomfort with your shift confirmed that something in you was genuinely changing? Leave that in the comments. Your story might be exactly the resonance another person in this field needs to hear right now. Let me take you somewhere. There is a story told in the oldest traditions about light, about a keeper of a great lighthouse who lived on a rocky coast where the seas were treacherous and the storms were frequent and powerful. The keeper's name was Elias. And Elias had tended that lighthouse for more years than most people in the surrounding villages could remember. Ships had been saved by that light, countless ships. Sailors who had been completely lost in the dark, and the storm had found their way to safe harbor because of the steady, unwavering frequency of Elias's light. But there came a season of particularly violent storms. Night after night, the seas rose and the wind howled, and the waves crashed against the lighthouse with a force that shook the walls and rattled the glass. And the people of the village, watching from their home, sometimes wondered if the lighthouse could survive it, if the light could hold. And some of them, in their fear, came to Elias and said, "You should lower the light. You should dim it. The storms are too powerful, and the light draws attention. And perhaps if you dim it, the storms will pass by without targeting you." And Elias looked at them with a kind of gentle certainty that stopped their fear in its tracks and said, "The light does not draw the storm. The light exists because the storm is already there. If I dim the light to avoid the storm, I do not protect myself. I only ensure that every ship in those waters has no mass home. And you are both the lighthouse and the light." Part of you has wondered, in the most difficult moments of your activation, whether being this bright, this coherent, this unmistakably yourself is worth the exposure. Whether it would be easier to dim down, to fit back in, to stop vibrating at a frequency that makes the people around you uncomfortable. And the answer that your halo knows even when your mind is tired, is the same answer Elias gave. The light does not draw the storm. The light exists because the storm is already there. And the ships, the people whose fields are capable of resonance, the ones who are lost in the dark and the noise and the fear, they need your frequency to find their way. Not because you are their savior, but because you are their proof. Your frequency is not a burden, it is a gift, not just to you, to everyone whose field can receive it. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get addressed often enough in conversations about frequency and protection. And that is the specific question of what happens when low-frequency experiences don't just come from other people, but from circumstances, from events, from the seemingly random collisions of life that arrive without warning and without apparent connection to your vibrational state. Because this is where the framework gets tested most severely. And this is where the most important understanding lives. Here's the truth that changes everything. A high-frequency field, an activated quantum halo, does not make you immune to difficulty. It does not place you in a bubble where nothing hard ever happens. It does not mean that loss cannot touch you, or that challenge cannot arise, or that the full spectrum of the human experience is somehow bypassed because you have reached a certain level of coherence. Anyone who tells you that is selling you a version of spiritual bypassing that will ultimately leave you more fragile, not less. Because when difficulty inevitably arrives, as it always does for every human being regardless of their frequency, you will have no framework for it. You will have no way to integrate it. And the dissonance between what you were promised and what you are experiencing will shatter the coherence you worked so hard to build. The truth is more nuanced and more powerful than the promise of a difficulty-free life. The truth is this: your halo does not prevent difficult experiences from entering your reality. What it does is fundamentally change your relationship to those experiences. And your relationship to an experience is everything. It is the difference between an experience that breaks you and one that builds you. Between an experience that lowers your frequency permanently and one that, after the necessary processing, actually raises it. Between being consumed by the chaos and being refined by it. When your halo is active, when your field is coherent, you encounter difficulty from a fundamentally different position. You encounter it as someone who knows what they are. And someone who knows what they are does not lose themselves in the encounter. They remain at some level, the observer, not a cold or disconnected observer, a fully present, fully feeling observer who is in the experience without being defined by it, who is moved without being swept away, who feels the full weight of the hard thing without concluding that the hard thing is the final truth about their reality. This is the deepest meaning of untouchable, not that nothing touches you, but that nothing takes you from yourself. Not that nothing lands, but that nothing colonizes your field permanently. You feel it, you process it, you integrate it, and you return to your frequency again and again and again. Not because you are performing resilience, but because your halo, once truly activated, has a gravitational pull toward its own coherence that is stronger than the pull of any external chaos. Feel what happens in your body when you hear this. Feel the difference between the idea of a life where nothing hard happens and the idea of a life where nothing hard can take you from yourself. One is a fantasy, one is a power, and you are here for the power. Let me give you another practice. This one is for the moments when difficulty has arrived and the halo feels compromised, when the noise has gotten through and you can feel your frequency dropping and you are not sure how to find your way back. Pause here. This is not symbolic. This is energetic. Say this out loud if you can, or in the silence of your own field. I am not what is happening to me. I am the field in which it is happening. Say it again. I am not what is happening to me. I am the field in which it is happening. Notice what that statement does in your body. Notice the slight shift in your relationship to whatever is present. Because this is not a denial of what is happening. It is a repositioning of your identity in relationship to it. You are not the storm. You are the sky in which the storm moves, and the sky, no matter how violent the storm, remains the sky. It is not diminished by the weather that passes through it. It is not defined by the clouds. It is not permanently altered by the lightning. It is the sky, vast and present, and at its nature clear. That is what you are. That is what your halo is protecting. Not the circumstances of your life, the sky of your consciousness. And when you remember that, when you return to that positioning even in the middle of the storm, the halo reasserts itself. The coherence returns. Not immediately, not perfectly, but unmistakably. Like a tuning fork returning to its frequency after the interference passes. Type this exact phrase in the comments right now. Type, I am the field, not the frequency of what finds me. When you type that, you are not just engaging with content. You are anchoring a principle into your field. You are making a declaration to your own consciousness that you have heard this and you have chosen it. And declarations made with genuine intention are some of the most powerful frequency-setting tools available to you. Because your words are not just sounds, they are vibrations. And vibrations shape fields. and your field is listening to every word you speak about yourself. Now let's go to the final layer,